Welcome to tonight's live stream. I am hoping that you can see me and that I am right side up. We're going for, the full effect here. So let's see. Poorly sideways was okay. Well, thank you, Loretta. I appreciate that. It's been quite the evening. We will have to truncate what we were going to do. We're going to have to shorten it just a little bit, but it's such a good day. I did not want y'all to mention this. I did not want you to miss this, I should say. So, okay. Also, don't mention it. That too. All right, let's see. I'm going to be looking at the wrong place probably. Let's see where I would normally need to look there. I think that would be straight. I don't know. All right, so anyway, we're just going to, as long as you can see me and I am in the correct direction, that is what we'll have to do. All right, so here we go. You can see that what I thought I would do is give you kind of just a little color commentary about what happened today. And let's see, I do not want that. Okay, there we go. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about like the courtroom and what it's like. It's really a pretty big courtroom, like take Delphi, and it's a lot bigger than that. There are a lot of people here. There are a lot of family members. There are a whole bunch of people from the media. So there's not a ton of extra room for just public, but there aren't that many by the time you count everybody is, so fitting into those other categories like media and stuff. So up front, there are 3 spots for people to sit, which would be like an appellate court, really. The judge sits in the middle, and sometimes a clerk sits in the middle. There are so many lawyers in the courtroom. You would be amused. On the Brooks Houck side, the defendant, there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lawyers. And of course, there are 2 defendants. It's not just Brooks Houck, it's also Joseph Lawson. And let me back up, because I know for a lot of y'all, I've done 7 videos about this over time, but a lot of them were a while ago, and y'all may be new to the case, and you may be wondering, like, what is this even about? Like, why are we covering this? So let me just give you the super short version of what the case is about, so you'll be caught up at least with that, and then go back and watch those other 7, and it'll kind of catch you up to where we are. So there are about 6 or 7 people you really need to know to be able to understand the case. The 2 central most important people are Crystal Rogers, gorgeous, like mid-30s, mother of 5, and she disappeared, was last seen on July 3rd of 2015. So it's been 10 solid years since she disappeared, and she is now presumed dead, and the person being prosecuted for her murder is her boyfriend at the time, Brooks Houck. They lived together. They had a child together who was 2 and a half at the time. Now, there is another person. There are actually 2 people who have already been convicted in connection with what happened here. One was convicted in about, I think it would have been about a month ago, roughly. Stephen Lawson was convicted of helping with the murder. So he was an accomplice. I'm not remembering the 2 exact charges, but the bottom line was he wasn't convicted of the actual murder, but rather of 2 things that went along with and supported that. Okay, that's number 1. The other person who has some conviction in the past is someone who was charged with lying to the grand jury. The reason this matters so much is he pled out, got a reduced sentence, and according to the defense, he was strong-armed into turning against Brooks Houck, the boyfriend, who is charged with murdering Crystal Rogers, the mother of his child and his live-in girlfriend. Okay, so those are really important people. Now, Stephen Lawson, I said he was convicted. His son is on trial with Brooks Houck. His son, full adult, is actually at the time was not paralyzed, has been in, I think, an auto accident since then, some kind of accident, and now is paralyzed and is it's right there at council table now. I really wanted to show y'all this little drawing. So this is like the whole courtroom. Skip most of that, but I wanted to show y'all. Let me see how close I can get. Right here. This is my beautiful drawing, my courtroom sketch, if you will. Okay, so all of these are lawyers sitting at the lawyer's table. Here's the judge up here. Here's the jury over here. Here we all are back here. So there are all these lawyers arrayed around there. So you've got the judge, the jury, way back in the corner. Now sitting right in the middle of that, you've got lawyer Houck. That's Brooks Houck. And then lawyer, and directly behind Houck is another lawyer. And then all the way over here in the corner, like an afterthought, like no one is even mentioning him. He's like barely there at all, is Joseph Lawson. Now, he could spend many years in prison, but he's just kind of, pushed to the side, and it's all about Brooks Houck. They mentioned him. I'm not saying he's not mentioned, but it's just sort of a strange circumstance because, here he is on trial in connection with the murder, and he's just pushed way back in the corner. Those are the people you really have to know, but there are two more that you're going to need to know. Those are, so the two Lawsons, brothers, father, son, one already convicted, one on trial, Brooks Houck, Crystal Rogers, but there are two more Houcks you have to know. And those two are Rosemary, who is the mother of Brooks Houck, and Brooks' brother, Nick Houck. So those three Houcks are ultra important because we have gotten word from the prosecution today that they think they have called Rosemary Houck, the mother, and Brooks Houck's brother, Nick, they've called them and said that these people are all part and parcel of the conspiracy. They were very clear on that. So that's sort of the lay of the land. Those are the people you need to know to kind of begin to understand it. And then, of course, as we go through it, it'll all get clearer. It is pretty complicated. And this is not the only murder that sort of is lurking in the background here. Some people think lots of murders are connected to this. For example, there was a shooting and mysteriously one morning, and Crystal Rogers, who is disappeared and is now presumed murder, her father was killed. So there are lots more things, but we're going to laser focus on what's already plenty to cover. So let's talk about the Commonwealth's opening. It was really well done. It's kind of an elder statesman sort of lawyer who did it. And he really urged the jury, just use your common sense. Kept saying that, use your common sense. He sort of went through what had happened about the disappearance of Crystal. The boyfriend, Brooks Houck, says they spent that last night, July 3rd, at the Houck's family farm. Now, we're going to hear that the prosecution doesn't believe that. They don't think they really, they do believe they spent the time there, but they think she was murdered during that period of time. So there was one of the most important bombshells that got dropped early on is a statement they say that Rosemary Houck, the matriarch, the mother of Brooks, said to one of Houck's, they called him a gopher, so employee who just ran errands and stuff, and that she was talking to this employee, Danny Silva, and she said that she asked Danny to help her find someone to get rid of Crystal. And he told her, look, if you got enough money, you can do anything. You can get anything done. And the prosecutor in opening specifically said, this is the, quote, beginning of the conspiracy. That it began, in other words, with Rosemary Houck. Now, she's not charged. She's not charged. Nick Houck, not charged. Not on trial, not even charged. But lots of hints that the prosecutors might want to do that. So on July 3rd, what happened was and we'll run through sort of the testimony some today, but according to the prosecution and to two witnesses we heard from today, Crystal Rogers believed she was about to have a special date night with her boyfriend, Brooks Houck. Now, they had their problems. Everyone apparently will admit that. Even Brooks will admit that sometimes they had trouble. But they were going to have, according to Crystal, a kids-free romantic evening. And she was really looking forward to it. Instead, the Commonwealth says they murdered her. The Houcks murdered her. And it's not clear exactly what happened because there's nobody. Nobody was ever found. Instead, her car was found abandoned with a flat tire on the side of the Blue Ridge Parkway. Inside was her cell phone, her purse, and no Crystal Rogers and no sign of her ever again. Some of the key pieces of evidence that the prosecution thinks, and it's the Commonwealth of Kentucky, just like we saw in the Karen Reed case. So there was a 13-second call from Steve Lawson to Brooks Houck. So Steve Lawson often worked for Brooks Houck. Brooks was very wealthy, had done a lot of real estate where he would build or renovate and flip houses, and was very wealthy. Steve Lawson worked for him. Brooks is a pretty young guy, by the way, but Steve worked for him, as did his son. Not all the time, but they did contracting. So Steve, according to the Commonwealth, the prosecution, Steve drove to the 14-mile marker on Blue Ridge Parkway. Crystal's maroon automobile was left abandoned at exactly that point, and they think that's all important, that Steve Lawson drove to that marker right where the car was left, and then shortly after that he called Brooks Houck. So that they believe is really important. At 10:30 p.m. Witnesses saw that car parked there, and then they didn't fully explain this, but I gathered that what they think happened is that there was something they forgot to do, something they messed up. So Steve got a phone call from, they're calling Joseph Lawson, Joey. So Steve got a phone call from Joey, and then he takes off, goes over to the 14-mile marker, comes back, and after that is when he calls Brooks Houck. What exactly happens in there? Why does he go back to that area? Why does he go to that car? We don't know for sure. So Joey admits, according to the Commonwealth, both Joey and Steve Lawson, father and son, admit that they moved that car for money at around 10:30 p.m. So we'll see what comes in to prove that. They also argued, the Commonwealth did, that Brooks Houck, just 2 days before Crystal disappeared, put the darkest tint possible on his truck windows. And why, they say? It was so they could disguise the fact that Crystal Rogers was actually not in the car. That he went to the farm, she was murdered there, and then he drove home with the 2.5-year-old. But that 2.5-year-old was the only person in the car, that there was no Crystal Rogers anymore, and that all the rest of that was done by the Lawsons hiding the vehicle and so forth. So this is all, July 3rd is the last time Crystal is seen, and Brooks Houck will tell the police on July 4th morning, he wakes up and she's not beside him. He said it was, he fell asleep before she did. That was totally normal, but she wasn't there when he woke up. And he said, well, that was a little different. We heard from his testimony today. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So he doesn't call the police. He says, yeah, well, I just figured she'd gone somewhere. And not until the 5th. So 3rd, she's last seen. 4th goes all day. On the 5th, her mother called the police and said, you know, hey, we're really worried. Where's our daughter, Crystal? And at that point, the on the same day, the family, with the help of some friends, finds that abandoned car on the side of the road, and they let the police know, here's where the vehicle is. So at that point, and let's go back to the night of the 23rd, because remember I said that they were at the Brooks Houck farm, and I thought the prosecution did a fantastic job saying, okay, let's get this straight. Crystal tells all her friends, I'm about to have this romantic, wonderful evening with my boyfriend. And then Brooke says, yeah, and where she decided to go was take our 2.5-year-old, even though we supposedly have babysitters for everybody, and go to the farm and walk around on it. That was her idea of the big romantic evening. And the prosecution just says that's not what, more or less says that's not realistic. That is not her idea of the romantic evening. So something's wrong with your story, Brooks. So the family was telling the police, look, she's not here. She hasn't been here for 2 days. I mean, she wouldn't just go off and leave her 5 kids. She's, with them all the time. And her children are trying to call her. She's not responding. We heard from one of them today. It was really sadly emotional testimony. I'll tell you a little bit about that. So, and they say there's another thing that contradicts that. Brooks Houck told them that, he went to bed the night of the 3rd, next morning he's going to wake up and she's not there. And she was out in the living room playing games while Eli, the 2.5-year-old, was up running around, even though it was after midnight by now. And Brooks Houck tells them that she is on the phone playing games. But what they announce is that that doesn't make sense, because they have evidence that her phone was shut down, dead, totally gone. That was what he said. Her phone shut down, dead, and gone. And it was completely contradictory to what Brooks Houck was telling them. Truthfully, though, they played that snippet, and this is one of the things that the defense pointed out. Actually, what he said was that often at night she would play games and stay up. That wasn't unusual or weird. So I did think that was a little too strong for the Commonwealth. I thought they pushed on that a little too hard. So we'll talk on another day about this really weird part of the interview with Brooks Houck, where he called Stephen Lawson. But I really want to play that for you, and I could barely get on tonight at all, much less am I playing any clips for you. I'm just lucky to be here. All right, so let's see. I want to make sure I cover everything, so give me just a minute to look at my notes, make sure I don't leave anything out through here. Okay, I guess I'll tell you at least a little bit about what happens in this phone call. It is just the strangest thing. You really have to see this clip, and we will cover it probably Saturday night. I'll go through, sometime Saturday maybe, I'll go through the key parts of the interview with Brooks, and maybe another night we'll do the interview with Nick. They're on the internet. We heard about that from the defense. They were very mad about that. But we heard about that in opening statement. So they call, Brooks Houck is being interviewed by the police. His girlfriend is missing, and they want to know what he knows about it, what's his connection. And none of this makes a lot of sense. But Brooks Houck, all of a sudden, in the middle of the interview, says, they're asking him, who is this who called you at 12:07 at night? Who would call you at 12:07 at night? And so he realizes it's Steve Lawson. They call Steve, and he says, so why did you call me? I'm not remembering. And Steve Lawson says, oh, I called you to ask about a rental house for, I think it was his niece or my step niece or something. And so I was going to ask you about that. And the police are like, called a guy who hires you as a contractor at 12:07, just past midnight, to say, I'd be interested in a rental house for sometime in the future. So why, right? All right. All right. And they say anyway, it would take more than 13 seconds. So that's the argument made by the Commonwealth on that side. Rosemary, according to the Commonwealth, really wanted somebody to get rid of Crystal Rogers. Now, Danny wouldn't do it. Here is almost a quote. I tried to write this down as much as possible because it was so important. He said, evidence will show that Rosemary Houck was in a conspiracy to help Brooks Houck get rid of this young lady. So it could not be any clearer that they believe she was involved in the conspiracy. Will they charge her? I guess really the better question is, if they're so sure, why haven't they charged her already? I find that kind of confusing. But in any event, they haven't. She's worried about communicate. Oh, I did forget one key part. I want to tell you, I want to back up just a minute. Remember when I said that that Steve Lawson called at 12:07 and said, hey, I might be interested in renting a property for my niece? Well, bizarrely, apparently, Brooks said, well, Crystal is in charge of all that, so you'll need to call her tomorrow. But at the same time, he's saying that he's driving home from the farm. They've had their nice evening together. They've spent their time. He's now driving her home from the farm, so she's right there. So why not just hand her the phone and say, right here, you don't need to call back tomorrow, here she is. And prosecution says the reason that he doesn't do that is because she's dead. She's not really in the car. All right. So, and they were really clear, Rosemary Houck has not been charged, Nick Houck has not been charged, but evidence will show that they are co-conspirators or conspirators, but they are not charged. I do not understand that. I think that's difficult for them to explain. I don't understand the reasoning behind that if they're so sure that they're members of the conspiracy. Now, I do think one thing that often happens is the prosecution kind of rolls out and sees, are we convicting people? They take the easiest case and then the next easiest and they try to roll it out. I think we've seen some of that with the Adelsons, right? All right. So you are going to hear... I wanted to describe too. Remember I told you how many there are a ton of lawyers there in the courtroom. And a couple of notes about that. One is that when they do objections, they don't do any objections where somebody just stands up, at least not that I've heard, where somebody just stands up and says objection hearsay, or uses one of the key words that it might fall into, or a longer one. They don't do that. Instead, the person says objection, and the entire group of lawyers, or a pretty big percentage of them, go up to the bench, talk to the judge, and they play noise in the background while that talking is going on. That's how they're handling objections. So every objection is a sidebar. There's no discussion in the courtroom about the objections. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to mention. Remember I showed you about how Joey Lawson is like way over on the side there. I also wanted to mention, do not think that this is an accident. Brooks Houck is sitting right in the middle of the table of lawyers, and a very lovely young female attorney is right next to him, and another one directly behind him. That is not accidental, in my opinion. I think a lot of times what lawyers do when they're trying to persuade, to convince a jury, is they don't want him to appear frightening or scary. So they want the effects, the look of, look, his lawyers know more about him than anyone else, and they're not afraid of him. They don't think he's dangerous. They don't think he's some kind of monster who would attack them. So I don't think that's an accident, but that is what's happening in the courtroom. All right, so another thing, and I did actually do a video where I talked about this. So if you go back and watch all of them, you'll come across this one. But one of the most unhinged things of many that have happened in this case is that the Houcks taped, like audio recorded, their testimony before the grand jury. grand juries are super confidential. No one knows what the grand jury decides. It's the prosecutor, the grand jury, and they make a decision about whether the case can go forward. It's not a trial. No one goes to jail on that, but they do give the prosecutor the permission to carry forward with the case. So during the course of the grand jury, apparently they actually secretly recorded this grand jury testimony, and when search warrants were executed later, police find the tapes. And that's when they learn, oh, there's actually been a recording of this. And so they actually called out two other people. This is all still in opening, mind you. Two other people, the sister of Brooke Houck, Rhonda McElvoy, and another person, I didn't hear any description of relationship with them, Larry Mock, I thought they were saying, who were included in this secretly recording grand jury testimony. Now, they mentioned that the statute of limitations has run, so there's no charges would ever come from this, but they mentioned that in opening. I thought that was interesting. I was kind of surprised that any of that evidence would come in, but obviously they must think it will, or they couldn't mention it in opening. So I assume that it will come in soon. The cell phone expert is going, they will definitely have a cell phone expert. And one of the things the cell phone expert is going to talk about is that Brooks Houck, according to what they found on his cell phone location data, that day before this big evening with Crystal Rogers when she disappeared, July 3rd, that whole day Brooks Houck spent at the family farm, the same place where he took Crystal back for their romantic evening, which consisted of walking around the farm. And did I mention it was raining, apparently pouring rain? They even today showed us a video of all these various spots around town on that day with rain coming all day. So they're like, what woman wants to go on a romantic interlude walking around a muddy farm in the rain? What made you think that was her choice, Brooke? That's not believable. Nick Houck is, as I mentioned, named by the Commonwealth as a conspirator who has not been charged. And Nick Houck, one of the things they found most suspicious about him was that he was a police officer, and he's supposed to keep his phone on. What if there's an emergency? What if they need to reach him? But instead, all day long, he kept his phone off for, I believe they said, a 24-hour period. So he turned it off late on the 3rd, and it didn't come back on until the 4th. So again, he's not charged, but they apparently plan to put that evidence in this trial. Brooks Houck says that on the 5th, when he's interviewed, it was Crystal's idea to go to the farm. That was where she wanted to go, which the Commonwealth is not buying at all. And we'll hear that from a witness, so I'll skip that. I want to make this, we have a lot to cover and I got a late start. So, all right. So then we heard from the defense. So that's the Commonwealth's opening. And I thought it was really strong. It had a lot of really important evidence that we're going to hear about. One of the things that, how could I have missed this? Maybe it's further on. I'll just go ahead and riff about it anyway, without my notes. But one of the bizarre things that supposedly we are going to hear about in this trial is Rosemary Houck was at a table with Brooks and Nick, and they all somehow recorded each other. They somehow recorded this conversation they were having, in which Rosemary says something about, in a whisper apparently, something about a blanket in Nick's patrol car. And she's worried about it because they have taken Nick's patrol car to search through it. And the implication from the Commonwealth is, that she was worried about it because what they had done is wrapped Crystal's body in a blanket and stuck it in Nick Houck's patrol car. Now, the defense is going to counter that. We'll hear that as we go through. So I would say the defense theme was pressure. that there was, and they even said pressure. There was pressure, first of all, from the family of Crystal Rogers. They started this group, Team Crystal, and that they were pressuring the police to find Brooks Houck. They were convinced Brooks Houck did it. And so they were saying, Brooks Houck did it, and we think you need to arrest him, you need to charge him. There was also, they said, pressure from publicity, the likes of which the county had never seen, from social media and from even broader publicity than that. For example, there was a documentary on Oxygen about that, about this case. So within hours, they said, the police, everybody really centered on Brooks Houck. It was Brooks. It had to have been Brooks. And nobody was really looking significantly at other options. He called that a situation that's dangerous to our system of justice. Said the police turned into, instead of really just searching for the truth, they started relying on coercion and manipulation and things like that. They were charged with horrific crimes they didn't commit, both Joey and Brooks Houck. The Crystal and Brooks, they said, well, yeah, they had some bumps in the road, but they had a good relationship. And that very last day, when they wrote each other text messages, they were writing each other, love you, love you. They weren't fighting. Nothing in the text messages suggested they were at a bad spot. So that evening, the July 3rd evening, they go out to the farm. They got home just after midnight. Brooks went to bed, and you've heard the rest about how he woke up, she wasn't there. He tried to call her. He just figured she didn't want to talk to him. Brooks Houck, according to the defense, was very cooperative, particularly in the early stages. After that, he knew he was the target, and he was still cooperating. It was only over time that he turned to the point where he just thought it was too much. And they talked about all of the effort that was made to find Crystal, to find facts, to find evidence. 70 search warrants, and that was just from the Nelson County Police. Yep, Nelson County alone, 70 search warrants. And they said they searched the Houck home repeatedly, the Houck farm repeatedly, lakes, dive teams, other farms, her car. They used excavators, they used chemicals to look for blood. They'd done all they could. And yet, and they are making a big deal of Detective John Snow, who was the lead investigator until he retired in 2019. And they said, he worked on this nonstop, thousands of hours that he billed to this, including a lot of overtime, to this one case. And all of that, no sign of her body. There was no evidence about the cause, no evidence about the mechanism of death, no evidence of where she was killed, no evidence of a crime scene. There was no crime scene. There was no murder weapon. There was no eyewitness. And most importantly, there was no body. So that was through 2019. And then, and there were a lot of things that were done that were really bad investigation, like just shouldn't have been done in a good, healthy investigation. For example, they talked about that interview of Brooks Houck that I mentioned is on the internet. We'll go over it this weekend. So Brooks Houck's interview, as well as Nick's, or somehow they got released to the public in October of 2015. And he said, due to a mistake, not the fault of the Nelson County Police. So again, I was a little surprised that they were allowed to mention that. First of all, I assumed that each of these witnesses hadn't seen it yet, but also if it wasn't the fault of anyone in law enforcement, I wasn't clear why it really mattered, why this was relevant. He talked about podcasts with theories. I thought that was pretty funny. We have no theory here other than we would like to know what the truth is. He also talked about that Oxygen National miniseries that talked about this case. All of that sort of publicity, they said, led to a witch hunt against Brooks Houck. So that was phase one, was the Detective John Snow phase. Then he retires. Phase two, the FBI takes over. And from about August of 2020 until January of 2022, the FBI has taken over and just poured in unimaginable resources, he said. That they did everything basically over again. More search warrants. They re-interviewed witnesses. They re-examined cell phones using new technology. And all of that happened, and still no weapon, no eyewitness, nobody was charged. So by now we're 7 years past the disappearance. And one of the arguments so their argument is all of that time, nobody was charging him. And then this super aggressive prosecutor came in and they suddenly decided, we're going to do something. I'm going to look good and I'm going to charge him. So that's the defense argument. So Brooks Houck, and they ticked off some more of the arguments that we heard about during that opening from the Commonwealth, from the prosecution. Like that, one of the things we have heard, I mean, if you read anything about this case, one of the first things you hear is Brooks Houck didn't call the police and he didn't look for Crystal Rogers. And the presumption is, if you wake up in the morning and your wife is suddenly gone and she doesn't answer your phone calls, wouldn't you call the police? Wouldn't you get a little worried? Wouldn't you go out and try to find her? None of that did actually happen, though. What the defense argued in opening is, Brooks Houck was asked by the Nelson County Sheriff's Office to stay away, that this was a volatile situation with a lot of hurt feelings, and please just don't get involved. So he said, in other words, without testifying, but they stated in opening, the reason he didn't look for her was he was told, don't do that. As for those tinted windows, the reason for that is their son Eli had significant eye conditions. He's even had surgeries for them. He wears special glasses. His eyes are very sensitive to light. And they said, you will see medical records that prove this. I thought that was a super good argument on the windows tinted. If that's the case, I'm honestly surprised that they mentioned it, other than the timing, which supposedly was just exactly 2 days before. And maybe Eli wasn't diagnosed yet. We haven't seen these records, but I did think that was a pretty strong argument. Now, as to Nick turning off his phone, which really bothered the Commonwealth, Nick was moving with his girlfriend that weekend, and they were having an argument about the move, and his tendency was to ignore her when she was angry. A super healthy way to handle conflict, boys and girls. If you're having problems, just turn off your phone. Don't speak to each other. That is such a great idea. But in any event, they said that's what Nick did. So he turned off the phone, and that was why he turned it off at that exact timing. It was just an unfortunate coincidence. I need to say hi to a couple of people too. I want to say hi to Grace and to Rick. I saw them today at court, and it was great to see you. All right, so Crystal was on the couch when they went to bed, but as I mentioned, they say that he did not really state that she was on the phone playing the game at the time. That's what she normally does. As for Rosemary Houck and whispering on this recording about that blanket in Nick Houck's car, they said, look at the context. They're super paranoid. They are unbelievably paranoid because everybody suspects them. And everything they've ever touched has been searched. Everyone they know has been interviewed. Everyone thinks they did it. Everyone thinks they're involved. And the police keep interviewing them. So what they do, they circled the wagons and they didn't trust anybody. So let's see. As far as, remember the part about Rosemary Houck supposedly asking a man named Eddie, I think we've already covered that, and I can't remember any more details than what I told you before. Thank you, Jackie P. I can see that there are some super chats, and I'm going to try to figure out at the end how I can thank you for them, unless I just spot them at the time. Thank you very much. All right, so 12:07, and hopefully, I don't want to touch anything. There's no telling what will happen if I do. We'll try that at the end, when if I mess it up, we'll have at least been through the whole day. Now, this was super interesting to me, that unusual call at 12:07, right after midnight, when Stephen Lawson said, hey, interested in renting a house. And I often call people who hire me after midnight to ask them about things like this. So they said his stepdaughter had rented before from Brooks Houck and was trying to do it again. Quote, you'll hear evidence. I was really interested in that, because one of the things I understood happened at the Stephen Lawson trial, where he was convicted, is that the stepdaughter denied that she was looking for to rent, and denied that she had asked Stephen Lawson to help her. So I may have misread that, but I was really intrigued, because they announced very confidently from the defense that we were going to hear evidence that she was trying to rent and he was helping her. So we will find out. Another significant piece of, I guess, grouping of evidence, grouping of pieces of evidence, is fingerprints, because they went all through that car that was abandoned on the side of the Blue Ridge Parkway. What they found was that Crystal Rogers' car had fingerprints several places. There was an identifiable, strong enough, could actually see it, fingerprint on her cell phone, and it was not Brooks Houck, Rosemary Houck, Nick Houck, any Houcks. It wasn't Stephen Lawson. It wasn't Joey Lawson. So whose fingerprint was that? And then there was a fingerprint on the rearview mirror, but it was Eli's, the 2.5-year-old. There was a palm print on the rearview mirror, but there was no positive ID. It was definitely not Joey Lawson. That was one thing they said. And then there was DNA search done within the car as well. The steering wheel had Crystal Rogers' DNA. You would expect that, right? And no other matches. Not Brooks Houck, not Steve Lawson, not Joey Lawson. And there were 2 hairs found in the car that were suitable for DNA analysis, but the Commonwealth elected not to test them. So that's pretty interesting too. And they called Shane Young a, quote, extremely aggressive prosecutor who had targeted Brooks Houck. And that's a pretty a bold, I think, argument to make an opening statement. I'm kind of surprised to see that to just call out the prosecutor as unjustly prosecuting your client. That's unusual, I think. There was another construction worker who worked for Brooks Houck. As I said, he had a lot of different businesses, and Charlie Girdley was on the run from an outstanding warrant for arrest. And instead of taking him to jail, so I guess there were really 2 people who got some kind of deals. The first was the guy I mentioned earlier who had 38 charges of lying to the grand jury, which were all reduced. So he basically got time served, which was 8 months, and then got out. And they would have been much more if they had prosecuted them fully. That's one guy, and I don't really know exactly what deal he cut or what role he plays. But as far as Charlie Girdley, they told Charlie Girdley was on the run from an outstanding warrant for arrest that had nothing to do with any of this. But instead of what you would think they might normally do, which is taking him to jail, they took him to 2 investigators working on the Brooks Houck case. And they pressured him, again, with the pressure. They told him that he was, they believed he was involved in the Crystal Rogers crime. And he buckled to the pressure and began to give statements. And that was the beginning of this idea that they could finally prosecute Brooks Houck. That was their argument. There was also pressure put on a woman named Heather Snellen. She is in a relationship with Stephen Lawson. And they told her, according to what we heard today, your life may be ruined if you don't come off your story where you're protecting Stephen Lawson and you're not giving us information. Your little boy is your life. He depends on you to hug him. We're going to be shown that interview where she was pressured, and we are going to see her crying, is what they told us. Now, a month later, apparently, Heather Snellen wrote Detective Snow and said, look, I tried to tell you the truth. I felt a lot of pressure. And I gather maybe not totally recanted, but seemed to feel like she had been that they had misinterpreted what she said. She tried to pull back on that to some degree. And this gets rather complicated. All of this, and I'm just going to preface this. Some of us were talking about this today who were there at the trial. The opening statement by the defense was way longer than the prosecution, almost double the length, and it was probably too long. You could see a lot of the jury kind of, they seemed to be kind of looking around, not paying attention as much, where they had been raptly intent on what the Commonwealth opening statement had to say. So here's an example, and I'm just going to get to the bottom line and tell you what it is. I'm going to tell you one little tidbit, but basically they were trying to argue. I drew this little graph for you here. They were trying to argue you are going to hear cell phone evidence that's going to suggest that Stephen Lawson after 10:30 at night and before the 12:07 phone call to Brooks Houck, that he drove down the Bluegrass Parkway right to where that area was, where Crystal Rogers' car was found, and then drove back. You're going to hear that, but it's going to be false. And it's going to be false evidence because what really happened was there were two parallel roads. And on these two parallel roads, they all relay back to the cell towers that are along the Bluegrass Parkway. So, back to this, you see on these two parallel roads that there's bar written at the top one and car written on the bottom one. So here is the story, and I'm not going to trust me, this was very long, and oh my gosh, there was so much. So, and here's the science of where these come, the area they come from, way too much detail, I felt like. But, okay, so what they argued was that Steve Lawson was at the 2015 was married to Tammy Lawson, not the person he's with now, who was Heather Snellen, I believe. So Steve and Tammy broke up, and he got together with Heather. Later, he would get back together with Tammy, and then they would break up again, and he got back together with Heather, I think. But I am no expert in his romantic adventures, so I don't know that for sure. That's what I think they were saying. Anyway, so at this period of time, what had happened was Tammy and he were broken up, and they had a car they had bought together in both of their names. And this car was with a loan with Capital One. The problem was, since both of their names were on it, they both felt like they had to pay, and they both wanted the car, and they both had keys to it. So what happens is that Heather gets off early on the 3rd, and Heather is driving by the bar that you saw, and she sees this car that they own sitting outside the bar. So the person who is driving her, she's a passenger in the car, she's left work early because she was sick. Apparently that was confirmed by the FBI. And so she gets out and says, I'm taking my car. I see it over there at the bar. I'm taking it now. And then that same night, Joseph and Steve steal it back from her again. So all of that crazy story is really only there to tell us that there was a bar and he might have had a reason to be there, and then there was a car, and all of that would suggest that maybe his cell phone pings were really related to his being on the parallel road with the bar. So there you have it. Trust me, that was a lot shorter, even though it was kind of complicated. All right, so first witness, really, really good choice by the Commonwealth, I thought. Kylie, the 23-year-old oldest child of Crystal Rogers. She was, I think I said, yeah, she was 14 in 2015. I can't remember, on the lunch live I may have said 13. So she was wearing like a little pink and white striped sundress. She was she was very sweet, and it was very emotional. She said we were really close. She was my best friend. We talked all the time, all day long. It was really, we were very close. And at first, I really liked Brooks Houck too. And he talked about adopting me. I had an absent father. And she said, I had never had a father figure before. I thought, wow, somebody's really going to step up. And so I've never had this father figure before, and he's going to be that. But she said that after Eli, everything changed. When Brooks Houck had his first natural child, he was no longer as close to them, to the other children. And we did hear from more than one person that a lot of the source of the arguments between Brooks and Crystal related to the idea that Brooks wasn't treating her children as fairly or as kindly as he was their mutual child. So she told the sisters, Brooks Houck told the sisters that they needed to room in the basement because Eli needed his own room. So he moved them down to the basement, and there were obviously hurt feelings on there. So at this point, she starts telling a story about how she woke up one night and there were centipedes crawling on the wall, and she didn't want to sleep there. And she is just crying and crying. The lawyers all stand up. They, go to the bench there's an objection. They go to the bench for a sidebar, at which, I'm sure the conversation was something like, this is really not related in any way to the case. And the prosecution said, yes, I know. I wasn't really expecting that to come out. And they all stayed up there a little bit. Well, let's give her a minute to calm down, and then let's go back and ask a different question, which is what happened. So the day of Crystal's disappearance, the first day she was gone, was July the 4th. And Kylie said she called her mother, and she didn't answer. She texted, and she texted Brooks Houck, and Brooks never responded to her. She said she came home, she opened the door to her mom's and Brooks's room, and he jumped up, and I asked, where's my mom? And he said, well, she's out with Sabrina, which is the cousin of Brooks. Sorry, the cousin of Crystal. And she believed that. I mean, they were really close, so that was possible. She was just a beautiful young woman, really, the defense said no questions. Correct decision, totally correct decision. This reminds me of something I forgot to tell you. At the end of the closing argument, I am moving way too fast. We are in opening statements. We are not at closing arguments. So at the end of, we had the one opening statement from the Commonwealth. We had one from Brooks Houck's attorney. And remember, there's another defendant. He may be squished into the corner, but he could go to jail for many, many years. His dad, the recommendation was 17 years. So, and he had the same charges. So Joey, his lawyer reserved the opening statement he could make. Defendants are, at least in most jurisdictions, allowed to do that. They don't have to speak right away. They can save that and have it right before they start to present their case. That was really, I thought, a pretty smart move because they tag teamed it really well. Brooks Houck dealt with everything they needed to deal with, and it was very lengthy. He covered everything. And then now they'll have a second bite at the apple right before they do the defense case. So that was, I thought, pretty good move good teamwork there. So second witness was Christina Holly, who had been friends with Crystal for many years, and also was friends with Brooks Houck. I tried to write this down. I don't know. Brooks Houck was best friends with her uncle's cousin. I was like, wow, I don't even know if I would know people that far related. But anyway, they called him Uncle Brooks. And at first she said he was not excited to be a dad, and that that he, he said Crystal's already got plenty of kids, and, they were, I don't know if I want to be a dad. But she said as soon as she was pregnant at the same time she had her child, that he just lit up and became more okay with it and became really excited and was a really good dad from that point on. She was put on, I think, by the prosecution to get in some text messages she had with Crystal that evening around 5:30, I think it was, where she wrote Crystal and said, hey, would you like to go out for pizza? And Crystal said, well, I can't. I'm going to be kid-free. We've got babysitters for everybody, and it's just going to be Brooks and I are going to go do something. And she said, so I said, y'all are going to have sexy time. And she, meaning Crystal, said yes. And instead they made plans. Maybe they would meet at Chuck E. Cheese on Sunday, which for those of you in Europe is not the equivalent of any other pizza place. And if you're a kid, is way better. So, then they got into this whole section where I really feel like there was some kind of miscommunication, and it looked like the prosecutor thought that this witness was going to say something that this witness wasn't saying. It just got really awkward. But the witness was talking about his reservations about being a dad before they had Eli. But he seemed to believe that she was going to say that the reason he was having this problem, and he was concerned, is that they had already had Eli, and he was afraid that Crystal was going to take Eli from him, that Crystal was going to divorce Brooks Houck and get all the custody, and Brooks would have no relationship with his child. That seemed to be what they were trying to get out. But there kept being sidebars, and was he concerned something would affect his relationship with Eli? Sidebar. Was there any suggestion she had an intent to take away his child? Sidebar. It did not go well, that whole thing. I think they really thought she was going to say something, and I don't know what happened. It may just have been that he misread the description of what she would say that someone else wrote out. But in any event, she did throw in one other really important point, I think, that apparently Crystal Rogers did not go out in public ever with Brooks. And the reason, even though they lived together, even though they had a 2.5-year-old together, and the reason was that comments about her hair by Rosemary Houck, and Rosemary Houck said she's a mother of 4 and Mama don't like that. So Brooks, in other words, was saying his mother, or maybe it was Crystal told her this, that Brooks's mother, Rosemary, didn't like Crystal and didn't like her hair, didn't like the fact that she was a mom of 4, and didn't want her son to be seen with him. So they got that much in. The cross was just, honestly, I'll tell you about it and then we'll talk about it. So the defense started with, well, Crystal Rogers wasn't really taking your calls that much anymore, was she? Said, well, in fact, you told the police that when you called, she would hit the FU button. The reason, so what was the reason? She said, well, it was that Christina, had a problem with recreational drug use. I was on pills, I was being stupid. And so she was on pills. She had been off for a couple of days and was having some kind of withdrawal problem. So the reason she stopped by Crystal's house that day, and this all got kind of confusing, but came out here, was that she had to poop and she had diarrhea. And so that's why she stopped. And it was just it seemed like she didn't provide a lot for all of this downside, at least for her, in all of that. There was no cross-examination by Joey Lawson on this one either. So third witness, Amanda, from Bardstown, and I did not get her last name, so I can't tell you that part. But she was there to talk about, she saw Crystal that day at Walmart. Crystal was with her two daughters, Amanda was with her two daughters and her mom, and then they ran into Crystal, who was shopping there. Oh, great, I have low battery. Hopefully we'll get through. I can't plug that in while the microphone is plugged in, so we will just have to hope that I make it through. All right, so she said, she told them, Brooks and I are going on a surprise date night, which I will say, if he managed to convince her that they were going on this surprise date night and instead he was luring her to a place to murder her, that is unbelievable. I hope that it's not the case, but that is, I think, what they're suggesting. So according to Amanda, she was super excited about this. She was really looking forward to it. She confirmed that it rained most of the day. And then we went to probably the most important witness of the entire case for the Commonwealth, and that's John Snow, the detective, who was the lead detective in those first years, because he puts in so much of the evidence that they have. And I'm going to leave a fair amount of that for when we talk specifically about the video, because you can actually see the video. Even without being in the courtroom, they played it there, but it's actually on the internet. So we'll talk about it, and we'll do that another night, maybe this weekend. So Sherry Ballard, he confirmed, was the one who reported her daughter missing, not Brooks Houck. The car was found just west of the mile 14 marker on the Bluegrass Parkway. It had a flat tire, and this one I thought was super important. They had a black mark from the road onto the side, meaning, suggesting, hinting that something went wrong with the tire right there on the road. Now that's a little bit contradicted by the fact that he said the FBI found a piece of metal in the tire, caused it to go flat, and Crystal had been adding air to that tire for some time. So take that as you will. I mean, it seems like on the one hand, the idea that it suddenly went flat right there at that spot, that makes it seem like it had nothing to do with Brooks Houck. She just suddenly got a flat tire and was on the side of the road. And then what happened to her? But the fact that she'd been adding air to that tire, I would say that would go with the same thing. If she's been adding air to the tire, then there's been something wrong with it. It doesn't seem like it's related to Brooks Houck. And yet, the Lawsons apparently have admitted taking the phone there. At least that's what we heard in opening statement. Taking the phone there. Taking the car there. I'm getting tired. It's definitely time for dinner. All right. He is not aware of reports by Brooks Houck that Crystal Rogers was missing. I'm definitely getting tired. Okay, Brooks's interview was played. Okay, here's just this one small thing. I want to have a little beef about this, okay? Apparently, Crystal worked for him and ran a lot of the rental stuff. She worked for Brooks Houck, in addition to having 5 kids and being the mother of the 2.5-year-old. And so, for example, she was showing a rental that night on the 3rd, and he was doing something else, but she apparently worked a fair amount. He said he paid her $500 a month for her work. And her family was sitting around there, and you saw this really hard reaction right at that spot. I don't know what exactly it meant, but I noticed. I'm like, $500 a month? That seems like, and then he paid, most of the household expenses, but she had to pay for her own. I think she owned her car, but she had to pay for insurance and other things. I'm like, how is she going to do that with $500 a month? It seemed really hard. I just thought, there's something wrong with that situation right there. All right. They went a little more into detail about the timing. I think we've already covered all of that. That he usually wakes up at 7 a.m. That she usually sleeps later, but she wasn't there that particular morning. He called her. It went to voicemail. Absolutely. They asked right there, can we search Crystal's phone? He said, absolutely. Hands it to them. That was a point for the defense. And at one point, the detective asked Brooks, this is in the interview, what if someone offered her a ride after she had that flat tire? Do you think that could be? Thank you, Dee Marie. I appreciate that very much. I will do that. And Brooks says someone trying to force her to do something would have their hands full. I thought that was an interesting comment. At this point, and like I said, we're going to cover the interview later. Okay, so there was something that was said. I'm just going to put this in I am highly confused here. So I asked around. I'm like, and at least one other person heard exactly what I heard, and it made no sense. So this is the Commonwealth putting it up, and I think they said that someone named Terrell was driving on 49, called a tip in to the detective, and said they saw Mrs. Rogers next to a vehicle with a flat stranded near Avon Focal Bridge on Highway 49. Now, Avon Focal Bridge on Highway 49 doesn't sound like Blue Ridge Parkway to me. And also, I think, so did the other person, they said the tip was called in from 1 to 2 on Sunday afternoon, which makes it look like Crystal's still awake, still alive on Sunday the 6th. No, Sunday would be the 5th, I think. So the 3rd is Friday. She is last seen then. She's not seen on Saturday, and then this tip was called in on Sunday afternoon. That the sighting of this person was between 1 and 2 on Sunday afternoon. So here was our conclusion. We both heard exactly that, which is super negative for the Commonwealth. So if we heard that, then maybe people on the jury did too. So I hope that they will clarify that, because it was very confusing and I didn't think it made a lot of sense. I told you we saw videos of the weather. We also saw videos of Brooks Houck's vehicle, and they used that to sort of establish and prove the timeline and when he was moving, and what time he left the farm, what time he came back, went back to the farm, what time he returned home, which was somewhat after midnight. All right, I think we have pretty much covered everything we needed to cover today. I am thinking I could maybe take a few questions. What I would like to do is say thank you to people. If I can figure out how to do that, I could, that would take a long time. I could scroll through here. What I think might be better is to try to capture this later, so I can say thank you for your super chats. But I would also like to take just a few questions. It's super late, and I don't want to go too much later than we are, but I'll take a question or two. It would help me if you would put question marks at the beginning, because it's a lot easier to spot. Okay, who did better today? Candy asked, defense or prosecution? Well, I would say I would call today for the prosecution, for the Commonwealth. And I would say that because I felt like their opening was just strong. I felt like it was really good. And I also felt like it's their case, right? If they're not doing well in their case, I remember one of my mentors saying, if you're not winning by the time you finish presenting your case, then you are, then you're not going to win. It's not like it's going to get better after the other side gets up there and starts. So I do think that the Commonwealth, it was a good day for them, a real strong day for them. They have a lot more to do with Detective John Snow, so we will find out about that. Okay. And I'm not going to get everybody. I'm taking these randomly as they come across and I spot the question marks. S. Mickey Mouse is asking me, would, I guess, do I have to, why did it disappear? He was asking me something. Oh, here we go. Would saying they saw Crystal on Sunday be hearsay? Well, yes. And from what he said, I think that they were going to bring her to talk about, or bring the person Terrell, who gave that tip. So we will find out more about that. That's what I think was happening. And he was simply summarizing the investigation because the jury was specifically instructed, this is not for truth. This is to tell you, what the discussion was. This is not to prove the truth of the matter. And therefore, they was not hearsay under whatever he had allowed it to come in on. Carmina, such an interesting question. Did the two defendants share a legal team in the past? So that leads to yet another of the unhinged moments to talk about in this case. No, they have never shared counsel in the sense of had the same lawyer. But at one point, at times, they thought they would try all three defendants together, Stephen Lawson, Joey Lawson, and also Houck. And in the middle of a hearing, Stephen Lawson stood up and said, Judge, I want another lawyer. I don't want this lawyer right here next to me. I don't want him. And the prosecutor weighs in and goes, yeah, it's really bad. And they were both arguing, prosecutor and Stephen Lawson, that the attorney was basically working with Houck's attorney, that he was in Houck's attorney's hip pocket, and they were planning their stuff together without him and without his permission and without his agreement. So we didn't get any background on that. It was just, I have never in my life seen someone stand up and fire their attorney like in the middle of the hearing. And so the judge is like, okay, well, we're going to stop things, obviously. What else could he do? And the prosecutor weighing in on that. Just very, very strange moment. All right, let's see. So, no, they don't share technically counsel, but there was the belief that maybe they did. Lee T. asked, did you get to see Mrs. Ballard or any of the other family there? Yes, they're all there. They have a lot of people here. And the defense has pretty many people too. There are a lot of family members in the courtroom, and it is obviously so emotional for them. I mean, just this is a terrible situation. And one of the things that you remember in this case is they really never found a body of Crystal Rogers, and so there's still that missing piece. I can't really imagine what it's like for them. Let's see. I am looking for questions. Do you like the judge? Katrina Raven says. Yes, I think he's doing a great job. I find it really interesting that they're doing all of the arguments in sidebar, and we're not hearing any of that. And at no point has he asked for arguments, say, in the courtroom that the people watching could see that maybe the jury couldn't see. So I find that really interesting. So I want to say thanks to all the people who have given super chats, and that I'm not going to be able to see, I don't think. I'm sure there's some secret method for doing that. But I especially want to thank Dee Marie. Thank you very much. And I will see you all tomorrow. We have day 2 of the trial. I think it's going really fast. The Stephen Lawson trial was unbelievably fast. I think they started on a Tuesday and they were done by Friday. They are setting aside 10 days for this particular trial, which is kind of strange because that would run through July 4th. So then it would go pretty far into that next week. So I don't know for sure that they'll actually manage that. I think it might be shorter than that anyway, though. So, all right. I am glad we finally got this working, and I will look forward to seeing y'all tomorrow. It's a great case. I think you're really going to enjoy hearing about it and learning about it, and we can watch together. So I will see you then, if I can